Have you ever had the disconcerting experience of interacting with someone who seemed to be physically present, who spoke and acted like anyone else, but who, in some inexplicable way, conveyed a feeling of inner emptiness? Someone whose eyes, despite being open and functional, seemed strangely dull, devoid of that indefinable spark we instinctively recognize in other human beings? Perhaps you attributed this disturbing impression to personal dislike, personality differences, or simply your own imagination. But what if there was something deeper going on? What if your intuition was picking up on a spiritual reality that most people choose to ignore or are completely unaware of? Rudolf Steiner, the great Austrian clairvoyant and philosopher, who dedicated his life to investigating the hidden dimensions of human existence, made extraordinary and deeply disturbing revelations about this phenomenon. He stated that among us there are beings who, despite having perfectly functional human bodies, lack something essential that most of us take for granted: a genuine individual soul in the full sense of the word. Before we proceed, it is absolutely crucial to establish the correct context for this extremely sensitive discussion. Steiner was not promoting discrimination or dehumanization of any group of people. He was not suggesting that we should treat certain individuals as inferior or unworthy of respect and consideration. Rather, his intention was to expand our understanding of the complexity of human existence and help us navigate a spiritual world far more diverse and mysterious than most people realize. The knowledge he shared must be received with maturity, discernment, and above all, universal compassion for all beings, regardless of their specific spiritual makeup. Steiner taught that what we call a human being is actually a complex configuration of multiple bodies or vehicles that interpenetrate and work together. The physical body is only the outermost and visible layer of this constitution. In addition to it, there is the etheric body, which supports vital processes and gives life to the physical organism. There is also the astral body, which is the vehicle of emotions, desires, and sensations. And there is the self, or ego, which is the individual core of consciousness, the divine spark that gives each human being their unique and unrepeatable identity, their capacity for self-awareness, and their connection with the higher spiritual dimensions. In the majority of human beings we encounter, all of these components are present and integrated, although in different degrees of development and harmony. But Steiner revealed that there are cases where this complete configuration is not present. There are beings who have a physical body, an etheric body, and even an astral body, but who lack a genuine individual self, a soul in the deepest and most specific sense of the term. These beings are not evil or dangerous by nature. They are simply different in their fundamental makeup in a way that has profound implications for how they experience existence and how they relate to the world and other beings. It is important to understand that Steiner was not talking about people with psychological problems, personality disorders, or neurological conditions. He was not pathologizing normal human differences or using spiritual language to discriminate against vulnerable groups. He was describing a genuinely spiritual phenomenon that completely transcends the categories of conventional psychology or medicine. The people he described may be perfectly healthy medically and psychologically. They may be functional and even successful in worldly terms. They may have seemingly normal families, careers, and social lives. What they lack is not something that can be detected by medical examinations or psychological evaluations. It is something that can only be perceived by developed spiritual faculties, or in some cases by particularly keen intuition. Steiner used different terms to describe this phenomenon in different contexts. Sometimes he spoke of beings without a self, sometimes of human hooves, sometimes of other technical terms of anthroposophic terminology. The central concept remains the same. There are human forms that do not contain genuine spiritual individuality in the sense that most human beings do. These forms may be animated by other forces, or entities may function more or less automatically based on learned patterns and instincts, or may serve as temporary vehicles for purposes that transcend ordinary understanding. One of the questions that naturally arises is, how do these beings come to exist? Steiner offered several possible explanations, depending on the specific case. In some cases, it may be that a soul that was destined to incarnate has withdrawn at the last moment or shortly after birth, leaving behind a body that continues to develop biologically, but that lacks its original individualizing spark. In other cases, it may be that certain spiritual forces deliberately create human vehicles for their own purposes. In still other cases, it may be the result of complex karmic situations that transcend what we can understand with our current limited consciousness. Steiner also indicated that this phenomenon is not new, but that it is becoming more prevalent in our current era. He saw this as part of a larger cosmic conflict between forces that seek the genuine advancement of humanity and forces that seek to divert or paralyze that advancement. Beings without an individual soul, from this perspective, can serve as instruments for forces that Steiner called ahrimanic, forces that seek to excessively materialize existence, deny spiritual realities, and imprison human consciousness in the purely physical and mechanical world. Now we come to the practical question that is probably on the minds of many: how to recognize these beings? Steiner was cautious on this issue, repeatedly warning against hasty judgments or paranoia. He emphasized that it is extremely difficult for ordinary consciousness to distinguish with certainty between a complete human being and a being that lacks an individual soul. Many characteristics that we might superficially associate with soullessness, such as emotional coldness, mechanical behavior, or lack of empathy, can actually be found in completely normal human beings who simply have certain personality characteristics, or who are experiencing temporary difficulties. That said, Steiner offered some general indications that, taken together and with great discernment, can point to this condition. The first is a peculiar quality in the look. The eyes, traditionally considered the windows of the soul, may have a different quality in these beings. Not necessarily cold or hostile, but somehow opaque, without that indefinable depth that we instinctively recognize in other human beings. It is as if there is someone looking from the inside in most people, but in these cases this inner presence is absent or of a different nature. The second indication is a lack of genuine development over time. Complete human beings, however slowly they progress, show some degree of inner transformation throughout their lives. They learn from experiences, mature, develop new perspectives, undergo changes in values and priorities. Beings without individual souls tend to remain essentially the same over time. They can accumulate knowledge and skills, they can change external circumstances, but their fundamental inner quality remains strangely static, as if there is no one inside to genuinely grow and transform. The third indication is a peculiar relationship with deep spiritual and existential questions. Complete human beings, even the most materialistic and skeptical ones, generally show some degree of interest, or at least restlessness, in the face of the great questions of existence: the meaning of life, the nature of death, the possibility of something beyond the material. They may reject spiritual answers, but the question itself resonates at some level of their being. Beings without an individual soul often demonstrate a complete indifference or misunderstanding of these issues. It's not that they came to different conclusions after reflection. It's just that the dimension of existence that generates these questions simply doesn't exist for them. Questions about ultimate meaning, about transcendence, about the soul simply do not make sense in your experience, because there's nothing in them that corresponds to these realities. The fourth indication is an imitative quality in your social and emotional behavior. Whole human beings have genuine emotional responses that arise from within, even when those responses are inappropriate or problematic. Beings without individual souls often appear to be imitating emotional responses they have observed in others, like actors following a script. They have learned that certain situations require certain reactions, and provide those reactions more or less convincingly. But there is a subtle quality of artificiality to those able to perceive it. It's as if they are performing humanity instead of genuinely living it. The fifth indication is an absence of genuine creativity or deep originality. This does not mean that these beings cannot be intelligent, skilled, or even brilliant in certain technical domains. They can be excellent at manipulating, recombining, and applying existing ideas. But there is an absence of that creative spark that brings something genuine, innately new to the world, something that did not exist before and that could not exist without a unique individuality to conceive it. Your intelligence, impressive as it is, has a fundamentally reproductive quality rather than a truly creative one. The sixth indication is a peculiar relationship with morality and conscience. Complete human beings have an inner voice, a conscience that bothers them when they do something wrong, even if they choose to ignore it. They may act immorally, but there is an internal conflict, a tension between what they do and what they know is right. Beings without individual souls can follow moral rules perfectly, but for purely external reasons. Fear of punishment, desire for approval, calculation of advantages. There is no genuine conscience operating. There is no inner sense of right and wrong that transcends social conventions. They may appear moral, even exemplary moral, but the source of that morality is completely different. Steiner strongly warned against using these indications to make definitive judgments about specific people. He emphasized that all of these characteristics can have other perfectly normal explanations, and that the ability to truly discern these beings requires a spiritual development that most people do not possess. The danger of paranoia, a projection of using this knowledge to justify personal antipathies or prejudices, is very real and must be constantly guarded against. The purpose of sharing this knowledge is not to create hunters of soulless beings, but to expand our understanding of the diversity of existence and help us navigate a complex spiritual world with greater awareness and insight. One of the most profound and disturbing implications of this teaching concerns free will and moral responsibility. If a being lacks a genuine individual soul, Can it be held morally responsible for its actions? Steiner approached this issue with great nuance. He suggested that these beings operate according to their natures, just as animals operate according to their natures. They are not evil in the sense that a complete human being can choose to be evil. They simply are what they are, do what they do, according to the forces that animate them. This does not mean that your actions cannot have negative consequences, or that we should not protect ourselves from them when necessary. It just means that the structure of moral responsibility is different than it would be for a complete human being. This raises fascinating questions about the role of these beings in the great cosmic drama. Steiner saw their existence not as an accident or an anomaly, but as part of a larger evolutionary process that transcends our limited understanding. They serve functions, fulfill roles, participate in dynamics that have meaning in the broader context of the spiritual evolution of the Earth and humanity. Some of these roles may appear negative from our limited perspective, as when these beings serve as instruments of materializing forces that seek to pull humanity away from its spiritual destiny. But even these seemingly negative roles can have necessary functions in the grand scheme of things, creating resistance against which humanity can develop forces that would otherwise remain dormant. Steiner also talked about the possibility that some of these beings might eventually develop a genuine individual soul. This would not happen automatically or easily, but through complex processes that involve interacting with whole human beings and participating in certain transformative experiences. In this sense, our interaction with these beings is not just a matter of protecting ourselves or navigating around them. It may also be an opportunity to contribute in ways we can barely understand to their eventual individualization. This perspective adds another layer of responsibility to our relationship with all beings we encounter, regardless of our perception of their spiritual makeup. Let us now explore in more depth the different categories or types of individual, soulless beings that Steiner identified. This is not a rigid classification, but an indication of the diversity within this phenomenon. The first type are those that we could call biological automatons or empty shells. These are human bodies that developed normally from a biological point of view, but that never received or lost very early the individualizing spark of a soul. They work based on biological patterns, instincts, acquired conditioning, and environmental influences. They may be perfectly socially adapted, they may appear normal in all external respects, but they completely lack a genuine inner life in the sense in which most human beings experience it. The second type are those les that serve as vehicles for non-human entities or forces. In these cases, the human body is inhabited not by an individual human soul, but by an entity of a different nature that uses the body as a vehicle to operate in the physical world. These entities can be of various types and have various intentions. Some may be relatively neutral, simply using the human vehicle for experiences that would not otherwise be possible. Others may have specific agendas, whether for the good or ill of humanity in general. Steiner was particularly concerned with entities that he associated with Ahrimanic forces, forces that seek to materialize and mechanize human existence, denying spiritual realities and imprisoning consciousness in the purely physical world. The third type are more complex situations, involving human souls that are fragmented, partial, or in anomalous states. In these cases, there may be something that could be called a soul, but which, for various reasons, is not functioning in the complete and integrated way that characterizes most human beings. It may be a soul that, due to trauma or other circumstances, has partially withdrawn, leaving the body in a state of reduced animation. It may be a very young soul in evolutionary terms that has not yet fully developed the capabilities associated with complete individualization. It can be a complex karmic situation where the soul is present, but somehow prevented from expressing itself fully through the physical vehicle. Steiner also addressed the relationship between this phenomenon and certain conditions that we observe in the social and political world. He suggested that positions of power, especially materialistic and manipulative power, often attract or are sought by beings who lack an individual soul in the full sense. This does not mean that all leaders or people in positions of power are like this. Many are completely normal human beings, with all their virtues and flaws. But materialistic power structures create environments that are particularly suited to those who operate in a more mechanical and calculating manner, without the interference of a genuine moral conscience or spiritual concerns that might complicate the quest for power and control. This observation by Steiner has profound implications for how we understand social and historical dynamics. If a significant proportion of positions of power are occupied by beings who lack individual souls, this would explain much about why structures of power often seem to operate in ways that are indifferent or hostile to the genuine well-being of human beings. This is not a conscious conspiracy in the ordinary sense, but a natural affinity between certain types of beings and certain types of systems that value mechanical efficiency, control, manipulation, and accumulation of material power naturally attract and promote those who function well on these terms. And these are often those who lack the complications that come with a genuine individual soul. But Steiner was careful not to create a simplistic us versus them view. He recognized that all human beings, including those with fully developed individual souls, have aspects of their nature that are mechanical, automatic, devoid of full consciousness. We all operate on autopilot much of the time. We all have the capacity for coldness, calculation, indifference to the suffering of others. The difference is that in complete human beings, these tendencies coexist with something else, with a spark of consciousness that can recognize them, question them, transform them. In beings without an individual soul, these mechanical tendencies are all that exist. There's nothing deeper to balance or transcend them. This perspective also offers insights into why spiritual development is so crucial in our age. If we are living in a period where the proportion of beings without individual souls is increasing, and if these beings tend to occupy positions of influence in materialistic systems, then the work of individual spiritual development becomes not just a matter of personal growth, but a necessity to counterbalance trends that could lead humanity in disastrous directions. Every human being who awakens spiritually, who develops their consciousness, who strengthens their connection with higher realities, is contributing to a balance that is crucial for the future of humanity as a whole. Steiner also discussed how the existence of these beings affects the experience of everyday life for those who are spiritually sensitive. People with developed intuition often feel discomfort or strangeness in the presence of these beings, even without consciously understanding why. They may feel an emptiness, an absence, an indefinable quality of non-connection that disturbs them without being able to clearly identify it. Your source. This can be confusing and even distressing, especially when the person does not have a frame of reference to understand what they are perceiving. The knowledge that Steiner shared can, in this sense, be liberating for those who have always intuitively known that something was different about certain people, but had no words or concepts to articulate that perception. However, Steiner also warned about the dangers of becoming overly focused on identifying these beings. There is a real risk of paranoia, of seeing soulless beings everywhere, of using this concept to justify personal antipathies or to feel superior to others. Spiritual knowledge, when not accompanied by adequate moral and emotional development, can become a source of illusion rather than enlightenment. The spiritually mature person receives this knowledge with humility, uses it to deepen his understanding of existence, but does not turn it into an obsession or a tool of judgment. The right attitude, according to Steiner, is a combination of discernment and universal compassion. Discernment to recognize the diversity of beings that inhabit human forms, and to appropriately navigate the different qualities of relationship that each type allows. Compassion to treat all beings with dignity and respect, regardless of their specific spiritual makeup. Even beings without individual souls deserve to be treated with decency, not because they have the same moral rights as full human beings, but because how we treat all beings reflects and shapes who we are. Treating any being with cruelty or contempt degrades our own humanity, regardless of the nature of the being in question. There is also the dimension of how this knowledge affects our understanding of human relationships, especially intimate relationships. Steiner recognized that it is possible to have relationships with beings that lack an individual soul without consciously knowing it. A person can get married, have children, spend decades with someone whose spiritual constitution is fundamentally different from theirs. This does not necessarily mean that the relationship is fake or worthless. There can be genuine affection, mutual care, meaningful shared experiences, but there are also specific limitations that inevitably exist when one party lacks the capacity for deep spiritual connection that characterizes relationships between whole human beings. For those who discover or suspect that they are in a relationship of this type, the situation is complex and there are no simple answers. Steiner did not necessarily advise ending such relationships, recognizing that each situation is unique and that there are many factors to consider. What he emphasized was the importance of not abandoning one's own spiritual development and not allowing one's partner's limitation to become a definitive limitation for oneself. It is possible to love someone whose abilities are different from ours, just as we love children or animals whose abilities are different from ours. But it is important not to expect from these relationships what they cannot give, not to project depths that do not exist, not to sacrifice one's own spiritual path in the hope of a reciprocity that is not possible. There is also the question of how this knowledge affects our understanding of fatherhood and motherhood. Steiner suggested that it is possible for a child to be born without an individual soul, even to parents who are completely human in their own being. This is a painful possibility for any parent to contemplate, but Steiner saw value in acknowledging this possibility rather than denying it. Parents who intuitively sense that something is different about one of their children may find some comfort and clarity in understanding that this perception may have a real basis, one that they are not imagining or projecting. This does not mean that you should love that child less or treat him with less care. It just means they can adjust their expectations and their approach in ways that are more appropriate to the reality of the situation. Steiner also addressed the interesting question of how beings without individual souls experience death. If there is no individual soul to survive the death of the physical body, what happens when these beings die? Steiner suggested that the forces that animate the body simply dissolve or return to their sources. There is no after-death experience in the sense that complete human beings experience it, because there is no individual person to have that experience. The astral body and the etheric body dissipate just as the physical body decomposes, and what remains are only the impersonal forces that have been temporarily organized into human form. This may seem sad from a human perspective, but Steiner would remind us that we are projecting our experience onto something we don't know. Do not share it. These beings do not fear death the way we do, because there is no individual self to fear their own extinction. This perspective has interesting implications for how we understand eternal life and the immortality of the soul. Immortality, in Steiner's view, is not a universal characteristic of everything that appears human. It is a specific quality that belongs to the individual self, to the divine spark that inhabits genuine human beings. This spark is what survives death, what carries experiences from one life to another, what eventually returns to its divine origins. Beings that lack this spark are not immortal because there is nothing individual about them to be immortal. This does not make them any less worthy of consideration during their lives, but it does mean that their relationship to eternity is fundamentally different from ours. We now reach a crucial point in this reflection. How should we use this knowledge in our daily practical life? Steiner offered several guidelines in this regard. The first was to use this knowledge to deepen our self-understanding. Before looking outward, trying to identify soulless beings in others, we must look inward and question, to what extent am I living for my genuine soul? To what extent am I operating mechanically, automatically, without real awareness? We all have aspects of our existence that are devoid of spiritual presence. Recognizing this in ourselves is the first step towards genuine development. The second guidance was to strengthen our own connection with the spiritual sources of our existence. The more firmly rooted we are in our own soul and spirit, the more clearly we can tell the difference when this quality is absent in others. And most importantly, the more protected we will be against influences that seek to mechanize us, empty us, reduce us to automatons, functioning without genuine consciousness. Spiritual development is not a luxury or a hobby. It is a vital necessity in an era where the forces of materialization and mechanization are increasingly stronger and more prevalent. The third orientation was to develop community with other genuine human beings. In a world where not everyone who appears human shares the same spiritual makeup, it becomes even more important to cultivate deep connections with those who do. These connections are not just a source of warmth and personal meaning. They are also reservoirs of spiritual strength that can sustain us in times of challenge and confusion. The community of genuine souls working together in consciousness is a powerful force that can counterbalance much of what is wrong in the world today. The fourth guideline was to cultivate discernment without falling into judgment. There is a crucial difference between discerning the nature of things and judging them as good or bad. We can recognize that something is what it is without needing to condemn it. Beings without an individual soul are what they are, not by choice, not by malice. They exist as part of a cosmic order that transcends our limited understanding. Recognizing them for what they are is discernment. Hating or fearing them for this reason is a judgment that does not serve us and that does not change anything about them. The fifth guideline was to maintain active compassion towards all beings. Even those who lack an individual soul are worthy of consideration and decent treatment. They may not be able to reciprocate on the same level, but that does not relieve us of the responsibility to act from our own full humanity. When we treat any being with cruelty or indifference, we are diminishing our own humanity, regardless of the nature of the other. Genuine compassion is not conditional on the spiritual makeup of the recipient. It is an expression of who we are, not a response to who they are. Steiner also spoke about the role this phenomenon will play in the future development of humanity. He saw the current era as a period of great transition, where humanity is being faced with fundamental choices about its future. The forces of materialization, represented in part by individual soulless beings and the entities that animate them, are working to create a future where humanity becomes increasingly mechanical, more automated, more disconnected from spiritual realities. The forces of spiritualization, represented by genuine human beings who are awakening and developing their capabilities, are working to create a different future where humanity rises to new levels of consciousness and spiritual achievement. In this context, each individual choice matters. Every time we choose consciousness over automatism, connection over isolation, spirituality over materialism, we are contributing to one side of this great cosmic battle. It is not about defeating soulless beings or the forces that animate them. It is about to strengthen the alternative, to build a future where genuine humanity can flourish, to ensure that the seeds of spirituality are not completely suffocated by the forces of mechanization. Steiner also offered a hopeful perspective within this seemingly bleak picture. He believed that genuine humanity, despite all challenges, is destined to ultimately prevail. The forces of materialization can win battles, they can create significant obstacles, they can delay the spiritual progress of humanity. But they cannot win definitively because they are working against the fundamental current of cosmic evolution. The universe is moving toward greater consciousness, greater integration, greater spiritual fulfillment. Forces working against this direction can create resistance, but they cannot reverse the tide. This does not mean that we can sit back and expect everything to be resolved automatically. The eventual victory of the forces of light does not eliminate the need for our effort and participation. On the contrary, we are called to be conscious agents in this process, to do our part in the great work of spiritual evolution. Every individual soul that awakens, that develops, that consciously contributes to the good of humanity is making a real difference, is helping to shape the future in ways that transcend what we can directly see or measure. There is also the dimension of how this knowledge relates to other spiritual teachings and wisdom traditions. The concept of beings that appear human but lack something essential is not exclusive to Steiner or Anthroposophy. Various spiritual traditions around the world speak of similar phenomena, using different vocabularies. The Gnostic tradition spoke of hillock beings, trapped in matter without a divine spark. Certain indigenous traditions speak of empty people or shells. Jewish Kabbalah has related concepts about different types of souls and their presence or absence in different beings. These correspondences suggest that Steiner was touching on something that has been perceived and articulated in different ways by spiritual observers throughout human history. This does not mean that all of these concepts are identical or completely compatible. Each tradition has its own context, its own nuances, its own practical implications. But convergence suggests that there is something real being pointed out, something that transcends the particular formulations of any specific tradition. The serious student will do well to consider multiple perspectives, to look for the patterns that emerge across differences, to develop his or her own understanding that integrates insights from multiple sources without holding rigidly to any particular formulation. Steiner also addressed the delicate question of how this knowledge can be misused. Throughout history, concepts about different types of human beings have been used to justify atrocities, to dehumanize specific groups, to legitimize discrimination and violence. It is absolutely crucial that the knowledge Steiner shared is not used in this way. He was not identifying specific ethnic, social, religious, or cultural groups as soulless beings. The phenomenon he described transcends all these categories. There are beings without individual souls in all races, all social classes, all religions, all cultures. And there are genuine human beings equally in all these categories. Any attempt to use this knowledge to discriminate against specific groups of people is a grotesque distortion of what Steiner taught. He would be the first to condemn such applications of his ideas. Genuine spiritual knowledge always leads to greater compassion, greater understanding, greater inclusion, not division and hatred. If someone uses spiritual concepts to justify inhumane treatment of others, this is a sure sign that they have not understood genuine knowledge, or that they are deliberately distorting it for their own problematic ends. There is also the question of how this knowledge affects our understanding of ourselves in moments of doubt. It is common for people in a spiritual or existential crisis to wonder if they themselves have a genuine soul. They can look at their flaws, their disconnection, their moments of emptiness, and wonder if they are not themselves the soulless beings Steiner spoke of. Steiner would be kind but clear in response to this concern. The very fact that you ask yourself this question is evidence that you have a soul. Beings without an individual soul do not care about the existence of their soul because they do not have the capacity for such self-reflection. Doubt, searching, existential angst are all marks of a genuine soul trying to find and understand itself. The moments of emptiness, of disconnection, of mechanical operation that everyone experiences, masters, are not evidence of the absence of a soul. They are simply moments when the soul is temporarily obscured, distracted, asleep. The soul is still there, even when we don't actively feel it. Spiritual work is precisely the work of awakening the soul, of strengthening its presence, of living more consistently from its center, rather than from the more superficial and mechanical layers of our existence. We have now reached the end of this long reflection on one of Rudolf Steiner's most challenging and controversial teachings. It is a teaching that requires maturity to receive, discernment to apply, and compassion to balance. It is not knowledge for everyone, and it is not knowledge to be used lightly. But for those who are ready to receive it, it can offer a deeper understanding of the complexity of human existence and the spiritual world in which we are immersed. If something in these words resonated with your experience, if it explained insights you had but couldn't articulate, allow yourself to sit with that knowledge in silent contemplation. Don't use it to judge others hastily. Use it to deepen your understanding, to strengthen your own spiritual development, to cultivate greater discernment and compassion in your relationships with all beings you encounter. Always remember that the mark of genuine spiritual understanding is not superiority or separation, but humility and connection. The more we genuinely understand spiritual realities, the more we recognize our own smallness in the face of the mystery of existence, and the more we are moved to treat all beings with reverence and care. Knowledge about beings without individual souls is not a weapon to divide, but a tool to more deeply understand the great mystery of life in all its varied and often perplexing forms. May this knowledge serve your genuine spiritual growth. May he broaden your understanding without hardening your heart. May he sharpen your discernment without diminishing your compassion. And may he help you navigate this complex world with greater awareness, contributing in your own way to the great work of spiritual evolution that is the destiny and task of genuine humanity. In the end, what matters most is not how many soulless beings you can identify, but how fully you are living from your own soul. This is the only thing you have real control over, and it is the most significant contribution you can make to the future of humanity and the cosmos. May you live this truth with all the depth and dedication you are capable of. There are still additional aspects of this teaching that deserve our careful attention. One of them concerns the way in which these beings without an individual soul relate to modern technology. Steiner, although he lived in an era before the digital revolution, made prophetic observations about the relationship between technology and consciousness that have become even more relevant in our time. He suggested that certain forms of technology are particularly compatible with the modes of existence of soulless beings because they operate on mechanical and automatic principles that mirror their own nature. In today's digital age, we can see this manifesting in disturbing ways. Social networks, algorithms, artificial intelligence, all of these systems operate in ways that are more compatible with mechanical functioning than with genuine consciousness. They reward automatic behaviors, instinctive reactions, superficial engagement, and in doing so, they not only serve beings who already function this way well, but they also tend to shape all users in more mechanical, less conscious directions. This doesn't mean that technology is inherently evil or that we should reject it completely. It means we must use it consciously, resisting the automatic tendencies it encourages, maintaining our connection to the deeper dimensions of existence, even as we navigate the digital world. The genuine human being can use technology without being used by it, can participate in the digital world without losing his soul in it. But this requires constant vigilance and conscious effort. Steiner also spoke about the importance of art and creativity as antidotes to the forces of mechanization. Genuine aesthetic experience, whether as a creator or as an appreciator, activates dimensions of the soul that are inaccessible to beings without an individual soul. When we lose ourselves in a work of art that touches us deeply, when we create something that expresses our unique vision of the world, we are exercising and strengthening precisely those capacities that distinguish us as genuine human beings. Art is not a luxury or entertainment. It is a spiritual need, a way to nourish and develop the soul. Likewise, Steiner emphasized the importance of nature and contact with the living world. Beings without an individual soul can appreciate nature aesthetically. They can use it for their purposes, but they cannot have the deep communion with it that is possible for those with a genuine soul. When a complete human being truly opens himself to the experience of nature, something happens that completely transcends mere sensory perception. There is an encounter of life with life, of consciousness with consciousness, that nourishes the soul in ways that nothing artificial can replace. Another important aspect is the relationship between sleep, dreams, and the presence or absence of an individual soul. Steiner taught that during sleep, the soul partially withdraws from the physical body and comes into contact with spiritual realities that are not accessible during ordinary wakefulness. Dreams are often distorted reflections of these nocturnal soul experiences in other dimensions. For beings without an individual soul, the experience of sleep is fundamentally different. There is no soul to withdraw from, there is no contact with higher dimensions, there are no dreams in the genuine sense of the word. This may explain why some people report never dreaming or having extremely empty and meaningless dreams. While there are many possible reasons for this in normal humans, including simply not remembering dreams, in some cases, it could be an indicator of something deeper. On the other hand, vivid, meaningful, numinous dreams are evidence of an active soul connected to higher realities even when the body is asleep. Finally, it is important to consider how this knowledge affects our hope and our vision of the future. It may seem disturbing or disheartening to contemplate the existence of soulless beings among us, especially if we believe that their number is increasing. But Steiner would invite us to see this situation from a broader perspective. The existence of these beings and the forces they represent are part of an evolutionary process that, despite all its difficulties, is moving in an ultimately positive direction. Genuine humanity is being challenged to awaken, to develop, to claim its spiritual destiny in ways that would not be necessary without resistance. It is precisely the presence of these forces of mechanization that is forcing those with a genuine soul to become more conscious, stronger, more determined in their spiritual development. What seems like an obstacle is actually a catalyst. What seems like a threat is actually a wake-up call. In this sense, we can look at the current situation not with fear or despair, but with sober recognition of the challenges and renewed commitment to the work that needs to be done. Each of us with a genuine soul has a role to play in this great cosmic drama. Each of us can contribute to strengthening the forces of light and consciousness simply by living more fully from our soul, developing our spiritual capacities, connecting with others in genuine community, and refusing to surrender to the forces of mechanization that seek to reduce us. May we receive this knowledge with the maturity it requires. May we use it for good and not for evil. And may we always remember that the ultimate purpose of all spiritual knowledge is love, compassion, and service to the good of all beings.